I'm here with Dan Patrick. Dan Patrick is what you might term an upcoming author, although I'm sure for you it doesn't feel that way. It rarely is with an author. It's a long journey. But you've signed up with Golans, a couple of years ago, is it?
Actually I signed up with them in 2011 and I wrote 3 short kind of non-fiction, but fiction books. But more recently I've written The Boy with the Porcelain Blade, which was released last year in 2014, beginning of 2014.
That's part of a trilogy, yeah?
That's right, that's the first part of the Erebus sequence, and that's been followed by The Boy Who Wept Blood. And next January, the third part will be out, which is called The Girl on the Lies Throne.
Tell us a bit about that trilogy, what it's about, where you're going with it. Without giving too much away.
Well, yeah, spoilers. The Erebus sequence takes place on an island called Landfall, which is kind of a quasi-Italian Renaissance type setting. Most of the action in the first couple of books takes place in a huge castle called Domain, which is this big sprawling affair that kind of has 4 annexes, and each of the annexes has like a different noble house. And in the way of these books, the noble houses are all feuding and they've got vendettas and old scores to settle. But outside of that structure, there are deformed children called Orphano, and they grow up in the castle, and they're protected under edict by the king, and they're taught to duel, and they're given apartments and kind of the best of everything, but they don't quite know what they're meant for. And Lucian, who's the protagonist of The Boy with the Porcelain Blade, is one of these Orphano, and he learns quite a lot about what's going on in Domain, and he's kind of given the choice of whether to become part of the system or to challenge the system. And right at the beginning of the novel, he's kind of made exile, so he has quite a lot of problems during this book.
Yeah. Well, that in itself, it sounds like there's a lot of inspiration in there from real life and history. Is that the case with it?
It was really inspiration for this book sort of come from a couple of other writers. John Courtney Grimwood wrote a trilogy of books, the Assassini trilogy, which are really an alternate history, but he manages to weave in vampires and werewolves, but without ever explicitly using the V word or the W word. So they're a really great read, and that was a huge influence. I've had a few trips to Italy, so I love walking around the piazzas and the streets and everything, so that's cool. And also Gormenghast was an influence by Merlin Peake with that kind of huge, unknowable, sprawling castle and all the kind of strange traditions. So that was an influence. But also there's elements of sort of the Gothic and also kind of mutant superhero kind of undercurrent to it as well. So there's quite a lot of ingredients in the mix, but I've been reliably informed that it just about works.
Yeah. But before you signed up with Golans, was it quite a long process to actually get to getting that contract?
So I started writing for my own sort of entertainment really when I was about 25, and that was fairly terrible kind of science fiction-y stuff. And then I had just before I was 30, I kind of had another stab at it, and I started one novel, got to 30,000 words, couldn't figure out quite what I was doing, because I wasn't planning it, I was just writing it by the seat of my pants. So I tried again, got to 30,000 words, abandoned that. And then the shift came when I took the principles of NaNoWriMo. So NaNoWriMo is that thing where you try and write a novella in a month. I think it's 50,000 words. So I took that principle, but I applied it across the year. So if I write 1,000 words each week, I'll have a novella by the end of the year, and that seemed much more achievable. And it was that year that I really finished a long-form project for the first time. And even though that book is pretty terrible, it did teach me lots of things. It's sort of, foreshadowing, and it also gave me the realization that I can finish a long-form project when I set my mind to it, and given a proper time period. Writing books is like running a marathon. It's not really a sprint. It takes a long time. So that was good for my sort of self-confidence. And then I was laid off of a job. I had 6 months unemployment, and I kind of my boss at the time said, whatever you do, stay busy. So I took that advice to heart, and that's when The Boy with Porcelain Blade was born. So.
There you go, I suppose maybe that's the answer. Lose your job.
Lose your job.
Yeah, write a novel. Yeah, because writing itself is like any kind of exercise. You have to keep exercising those muscles. So as you were talking about with, it's a case of even if it does turn out to be garbage or something you don't like, it's still good to get that practice and build up that confidence. Is that very much what you found to be the case, and that helped to actually get you to a point where you were good enough to?
Yeah, I think every time you sit down to write, and it doesn't matter what you write, as long as you're writing something, you learn, something else. I've written all sorts of things. I've written book reviews. I was a burlesque reviewer for a while. I've turned my hand to trying to write reviews for albums just for my own entertainment. I generally inflict album reviews on my readers on my blog, so sorry about that. I worked on a comics editorial team, so I'd write, the introduction page and, type up the letters page and stuff like that. So anytime you're sitting down and consciously thinking about what words to use, what structures, all of that stuff, it's a learning experience, and you can go back to your older work and, try and look at it critically and, I wouldn't do that anymore. And, you learn, hopefully you see different stuff, and also you have to read widely in the genre that you want to write in, because how are you really going to soak up, see other people use the tropes, maybe subvert the tropes, try and avoid common mistakes, that kind of thing. So yeah, I definitely think every time you sit down, you consciously think about writing. Hopefully, there's going to be some improvement.
Well, you've spoken as well about what you believe is to have more variety in genre fiction. Is that partly what you're talking about there, or expand on that a little bit more?
Well, I think, I was talking about the tropes, and the tropes there for a reason. Fantasy is built on very common ideas, the mysterious wizard that pops up every so long to sort of save the kingdom that's facing the Dark Lord, and you generally have like a few fantasy races thrown in. I mean, that's very classic, atypical Tolkien-esque fantasy. But there's a really strong kind of leaning towards the kind of Scandinavian sword and axe Viking style sort of fantasy. And I think, it's very easy to become pigeonholed by our ideas of what fantasy is. And fantasy, by definition, should be fantastic, so we shouldn't be confined by these tropes. We should sort of dare to step outside of them. And my book, at least this trilogy, doesn't have any magic in. It alludes to magic, but the magic is really more of a technology that's been left over from a bygone age. And it's a lot of politics in there, a lot of I'm really interested in family dynamics, so a lot of stuff that comes through in my books is about kind of the characters' relationships to each other and how they build those relationships and how those relationships can nurture them and see them through difficult times. And there are a lot of difficult times in The Boy with Porcelain Blade. So.
Yeah, well, you've got to have the drama in there amongst your story. Well,
otherwise
he wandered around, he had adventures, that was it.
Yeah, otherwise it's EastEnders in period. That's not me.
No. In terms of very different things and variety, if you like, you said on your website, because you've done a short story for Shark Punk, which I think you described it as the weirdest thing you've ever written.
That's right, yeah. So it's a short story, it's an epistolary short story, so it's written as a series of diary entries, and I was really thinking, what if Frankenstein's monster kept a diary? And there's a touch of the kind of metamorphosis in there, and that the protagonist is clearly changing into something else. And so, there was a lot of that. There's a lot of body horror in it, and I don't really consider myself a horror fan. But even though I don't necessarily enjoy watching it, it does seem to come out in my writing quite well. And that was, it was contemporary, which was different for me. There's some sort of LGBT kind of right stuff in there, because I wrote it about the time that the Russian government were confiscating driving licenses from gay, lesbian, and transgender people,
Yeah.
and that completely blew me away. Like that was so strange to me. So I thought, well, I'm going to write this kind of Russian story that has a sort of a lesbian protagonist, and and take that to really spin it out to the most extreme degree. So yeah, that was a kind of strange story, but it's great to write short stories because they provide such a like a breathing space for like I've written 3 books in this kind of faux Italian world, and it's really nice just to jump into a contemporary thing and just do that.
Yeah. Well, you'd spoken about LGBT and that perspective in it, and genre fiction tends to be ahead of the game in a lot of ways, in a way, because it is actually tackling those issues and to do with feminism and trying to bring that in. Do you think that there's a responsibility within fiction in general to tackle that and try to just even in portrayals of these characters and have more of them in fiction in general? Do you think there's a responsibility in that regard?
I think there's a responsibility in society to include more diversity. While there are a lot of great authors doing good things on the LGBT spectrum, I also think there's some books that are very rooted in sort of very conservative kind of stuff. So, in the same way that we have that conversation in society where, like equal marriage thing in the States, so we have that friction in real life. We also have that friction in the genre community. We want to see more of it, we want to see less of it. Is it being represented enough? Obviously, I kind of have set out my stall on that quite clearly because the character, the protagonist in my second novel, is gay, and it talks about growing up or preparing to come out in a society where being gay is not acceptable and is actually very dangerous. So it just happens that he's one of the finest swordsmen on the entire island. So it's up to you if you want to go and have a pop at him. So but I do think it's important. I'd love for a guy to pick up my second novel and identify himself in the lead character, and that maybe, because I part of a Dungeons and Dragons group, and there's about 6 of us, and 2 of them are like a married couple, 2 guys, and we also have a member of the group is a lesbian. So it's crazy to me that I go to the cinema all the time and see straight white males as the protagonist all the time. Like there are other options out there, and I think that's why Mad Max Fury Road has just been so interesting, because they kind of got us there on the pretense that it was about Mad Max, but it was really about Furiosa.
It's getting a lot of traction. I've noticed, especially it's a really good movie, and it is. It's almost like there's a lot of art within it, art stylings and things underlying it which are very interesting in that. So, you're right.
No, they did a lot of good stuff.
So what's next anyway? You've got the 3rd part of the trilogy, which is it next year?
Next January, yeah.
Next January.
The Girl on the Liar's Throne is out in January, and I've changed things up slightly in that generally my books just have a single point of view character, and you're with them for their journey through that book. Book 3 deviates slightly in that there's one character who's battling to take back her identity from an imposter. So hence the Liar's Throne part of the title. And that was huge amounts of fun. Each chapter alternates between the 2 characters, and they sort of suffer reversals and difficulties as the novel goes on, and obviously they react to each other. So it's quite. And I bring in lots of characters from the previous books and hopefully tie up the series into a satisfactory conclusion.
You've got to aim to do that, I guess.
It was really hard. Like any ending is difficult, but when you're ending a series, it feels like the stakes have just turned up to 11. So
that's great. Dan, thanks so much for speaking to us.
It's been a pleasure.
Good luck with the 3rd part.
Thank you very much.
Whatever you write beyond that.